So, ladies and gentlemen, we've been talking in recent podcasts about the low budget for Hammer movies in England with great results. But with the Canadian tax break system, you couldn't really judge what was a low budget, medium budget, or high budget movie because so much tax money was thrown into it. But in that era of the Canadian tax break movies, one of the best and still holds up some 45 years later is the very underrated The Silent Partner. Now was shunned by the Oscars and Golden Globes. I think that's wrong. Christopher Plummer and Elliot Gould should have got at least some GG nominations. Now, The Silent Partner came out in '78. It was a film noir thriller directed by Daryl Duke and starring Elliot Gould, Christopher Plummer, and Susanna York. The screenplay by Curtis Hanson is based on a novel, Think of a Number, by Danish writer Anders Boelsen, as a third film adaptation of the novel. The movie was first to be produced by Carloco Pictures and one of the earliest films from within the country to take advantage of the Canadian government's capital cost allowance incentive plan, which gave production companies tax inducements to make commercial films in Canada. It's been called one of the few truly good films to come out of the tax shelter heyday of the 1970s. Now, The Silent Partner is also notable for being one of the very few films that have a score composed by jazz legend Oscar Peterson and for featuring an early big screen appearance by John Candy. It was a major critical and commercial success, winning 3 Canadian Film Awards, including the Best Movie, Best Director, now, by Daryl Duke, of course. Now, in this one, it's written by Hanson, produced by Joel B. Michaels and Stephen Young, cinematography Billy Williams, edited by George Appleby, music by, Oscar Peterson, production company Coroco, Pan-Canadian film distributors brought it up. It was released actually in the UK before it was released in Canada, 2 months before, in '78. Had a running time of 106 minutes and made a very impressive for Canadian movie, $2.5 million. Now, Miles Cullen, a board teller at a small bank in a large Toronto shopping mall, which was the Eaton Centre at the time, beautiful location, and that's been one of the historical parts of this movie people go back to, accidentally learns that his place of business is about to be robbed when he finds a discarded hold-up note on one of the bank's counters. He also figures out who the would-be robber is when he sees a mall Santa Claus hanging inside the bank, who was given the charity sign, has handwritten a special letter G similar to that of discarded note. Instead of informing his bosses or contacting the police, Miles begins stashing cash from his Windows transactions in an old lunchbox rather than the bank still. When the Santa Claus robber holds up Miles at the teller's desk, Miles, having expected his doing so, hands over a small amount and reports he gave all the money from the day's transactions. Thus, the film noir aspect comes in. Now, the Santa Claus thief, a misogynist psychopath named Arthur Reekley, figures out what happened when he sees news reports on how much was stolen during the robbery. He makes a series of violent attempts to get the money, which total about 48,000 Canadian, that Miles has kept for himself. Reekley starts following Miles to and from his home and making threatening phone calls to him. Now, Miles' coolness under pressure has attracted the attention of bank colleague Julie Carver, who has been having an affair with the bank's married manager, Charles Packard. After escorting Julia to a Christmas party at the Packard's house, he reveals to Julie that he's attracted to her. Now, when the menacing Reekley breaks into Miles' apartment and trashes to look for the stolen bank money, Miles turns the tables yet again by following him and setting him up to be arrested for the theft of a delivery truck. When brought to the police station to identify Reekley in a lineup, Miles does not point him out, aware that Reekley would then implicate him in the bank robbery. Now, a few months later, at his father's funeral, Miles meets a flirtatious woman named Elaine, who says she was a nurse who had been caring for his father. In fact, Elaine is secretly working with the imprisoned Reekley, who wants Elaine to keep tabs on Miles and possibly discover where he hid the stolen money. But by the time Elaine discovers that Miles has stashed a hold-up money in a safety deposit box at his bank, Reekley no longer trusts her, correctly deducing that Elaine has become romantically involved with Miles. Julie, meanwhile, has begun to suspect something of Miles and his new girlfriend. So the Christopher Plummer character, how he puts this all together, you know something bad's going to be happening. Reekley is eventually released from jail and confronts Elaine over where her loyalties lie. When she admits that she has fallen in love with Miles, an enraged Reekley murders her in Miles' apartment, decapitating her in a broken fish tank in one of the most violent scenes in Canadian thriller history. Miles is revulsed when he discovers what Reichley has done to Elaine, but recovers his calm and disposes of her body in the foundation of the bank's new building, which is under construction. Reichley, having watched Miles do so, confronts him and congratulates him on his cleverness, but says he will kill him too unless he gets the money. Miles agrees, but insists he be handed over to a public place where no harm can come to him. They agree that Reichley will come to the bank, again disguised, and be handed the money at Miles' window, where Miles will feel safe. The next day, Reichley arrives dressed as a woman. After Miles hands him a packet, Reichley says he intends to kill him anyway for all the problems Miles has caused him. Anticipating that Reichley was intending that, Miles hands him a forged recreation of the original stick-up note and shouts, "He has a gun," triggering the alarm. Reichley panics, pulls out his gun and shoots Miles, then flees into the mall where he is shot by the bank security guard. A gravely wounded Reichley tells the guards that Miles gave him the bank's money. The guard, not comprehending Reichley's meaning, responds, "Whose money did you expect?" Now, wounded Miles is taken away by ambulance. Julie goes along, telling Miles that she's figured out everything. He reveals to Julie that he has the stolen bank money, which she also knows. Both decide the time is right to quit their jobs and find another line of work somewhere far away. Now, John Candy, a good supporting performance. Tony Rosado, as well, from the SCTV fame, played a prominent bottom character. Now, this novel was published in 1969, was based on. Chicago Tribune called it an excellent suspense novel. New York Times called it a fine suspense tale. It was adapted twice, a 1970 Danish theatrical film directed by Paul Kaderhoff-Smith and starring Henning Morens and Bibi Andersson, and a 1972 West German telefilm directed by Randy Erler and starring Clovis Erm and Ida Schultz-Westrom. American filmmaker Curtis Hanson wrote the script on spec, hoping to direct, but was unable to persuade the producers to allow him. Now, here it gets interesting. The lead role went to Elliot Gould, who called it the best script I've ever read since The Touch. Gould later said, "I did adore Daryl Duke, and we had a very good work relationship." According to Gould, after the film was completed, executives wanted Duke to add a beheading scene, and he refused, so he was removed from the film. Gould shot it with another director. "I was not happy about it," said the actor. "Daryl really did a wonderful job." Now, the film was first produced by Coralco Pictures, and again, one of the earliest films from within Canada to take advantage of the Canadian government's capital cost allowance plan, which gave production companies tax incentives. The film was shot entirely on location in Toronto. One of the central locations was the then recently opened Eaton Centre, a beautiful location, which was open throughout the shoot. And Harry Reichley's hangout was the Silver Dollar Room, a well-known live music venue in downtown Toronto. Interior sets were constructed at Cityscape Film Studios in Kleinburg, Ontario. Hansen later said, "I ended up finishing the movie. It was brought back to producers to do a week of pickup shots and all the post-production. Among the pickup shots were scenes of Harry decapitating Elaine and Cullen disposing of the head in a plastic bag. The scene was added at the insistence of producers, but Duke refused to shoot himself due to the graphic violence. But the scene was necessary because this type of film noir style was the de rigueur at the time and coming out of, the Mickey Spillane era. Now, the Silent Partner did very well in Canada, both critically and financially, winning several Canadian Film Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Director. It was a sleeper upon its U.S. release, with Brendan Hanley of the Film Database All Movie noting that the film stands out as one of the best sleepers of the late 70s. Now, Roger Ebert, who reviewed it in 1979 for the Chicago Sun-Times, awarded 3.5 of a possible 4 stars to the film, calling it a thriller that is not only intelligently well acted and very scary, but also has the most audaciously clockwork plot I've seen in a long time. Ebert described it as worthy of Hitchcock. Now, what did Siskel say? He gave the film 3.5 as well, calling it a very entertaining caper film. He thought that the film was predictable, but the characters are so joyfully written and played that you don't particularly care if you can figure out what's about to happen. That's a typical film noir. So, Janet Maslin of the New York Times also wrote, just as he did with Payday, Mr. Duke has put together a dense, quirky, uncommonly interesting movie, this time at a high quotient of suspense. He develops these characters firmly and fast and populates the story with a lot of them weighed down by the monotony of their lives, but still sensibly always on the go. Variety called it one of the films that run for the gamut from intrigue to violence. The excellent cast is headed by York, Plummer, and Gould. It is entertaining. Kevin Thomas at LA Times wrote the film was tense and ingenious under Duke's light touch and boasts a fine Oscar Peterson score. Gary Arnold of the Washington Post stated before it takes an appalling turn for the vicious, the silent partner scenes an uncommonly clever and gripping suspense tale. Even after the story threatens self-destruct, you fight the impulse to suffer a major letdown for the sake of the swell, nerve-wracking time you've been having up to that point. J. Scott wrote in the Globe and Mail, as a suspense picture, the silent partner is first class. The story is told cleanly, and the coincidence don't strain credulity unduly, although I wish screenwriter Hansen had not exhausted his imagination of the plot. The dialogue clunks when it should decanter. Now, Elliot Gould gave the greatest reference. He screened the film for Alfred Hitchcock, and according to Gould, Hitch loved it. Now, the film was nominated for 11 Canadian Film Awards, called the ETROGs at the time. Even though it was the only film in competition that had not been seen by the public, it won 6 awards. Best Picture for producers Gart Drabinsky, Joel Michaels, and Stephen Young. Best Director for Duke. Sound recording David Lee. Sound editing Bruce Ninesnick. Original music Oscar Peterson, and editing George Appleby. Christopher Plummer was nominated for Best Performance by a Lead, as was Celine Lomez, and Trevor Williams also got an Art Direction nomination. Now, Hansen said the film later influenced his big movie, Bad Influence. Now, this was the first film from Mario Kaczar, who invested $500,000 in it. He tried to remake it, but says Curtis Hanson could not do it. Now, without this movie, all the tax break movies in Canada would not have been taken seriously. Did this lead to The Grey Fox? Did it lead to movies like Atlantic City, where you have international directors or writers doing in Canada? But the movie would have got an Oscar nomination if the wrong MASH actor was in it. If Donald Sutherland was tasked for the lead with Christopher Plummer, would have hit it out of the park. Christopher Plummer can make shit not smell. He can take an excellent script and make it completely beyond and beyond. Christopher Plummer is pretty close to being the greatest actor in Canadian history. He's been consistently one of the best actors in all type of genres. Now, this was what you call a CBC movie of the week. You would show it and show it and show it and show it for most of the 70s and 80s. And when hockey season would end, you would knew the summer was coming, where the silent partner said, "Stay tuned for the CBC summer movie, The Silent Partner, starring Elliot Gould, the award-winning silent partner." But if you know film noir, it's got all the elements: money, women, power, and crazy people. You put, like, say, Robert Mitchum and Kirk Douglas or Burt Lancaster in the main roles, it makes a lot of sense. Even, like I said, in the current generation, Lewis or Frederick Forrest or somebody like that, Tommy Lee Jones or whatever. What really works here, it's a Canadian motif for a British style or American style thriller film noir. So you're going beyond and beyond. And this was something that was tried in Europe. It was tried on the art scene. But this was technically the best Canadian movie for a lot of people of the 1970s that really should have got more recognition. Shunned by the Oscars and the Golden Globes, and it shouldn't have been. And I really don't know why, because Oscar Peterson's score. But the thing is, it didn't get a full release for the Oscars. I think that's a problem. And Gart Drabinsky, we all know the money he put in. He's been a money guy for years. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's the story of The Silent Partner. If it's the first time you're hearing about this movie, you could probably find it on streaming services or YouTube or whatever. Don't let the poster fool you. The real poster tells the story. It tells the ending, but doesn't give it away. If that makes any sense. Thanks for listening. Give us a like, comment, subscribe, or share. Bye.